How's everybody doing today? This is Antonio Moore coming to you from Tone Talks. I appreciate you guys tuning in today. I wanted to have a brief and healthy discussion about the new data that came out from Harvard, whether it's accurate, whether it's inaccurate, what it really reflects, and how we move forward productively to get real data that can affect all of our lives as African Americans. Harvard released their data that showed that this is the most diverse class ever. The first class is not majority white. And one of the things that jumped out of the page was over 14% African American, quote unquote, admissions. Now, what I have as a fundamental problem is something that's been an issue at Harvard for quite some time. When you look at that data and you look at it in context of some of the more recent articles in the last 5 to 10 years, there's clearly a problem with that 14%. It's not a true 14%. What do I mean? This is in no way meant to be divisive. This is in no way meant to be an attack on any subgroup. I believe that all of these groups deserve a chance for admission into Harvard. That's what Dr. King fought for. This is more about a direct statement about what affirmative action was meant to do and the realities of what the cost of slavery and Jim Crow has left behind in millions of African American descendant of American slavery homes across this nation, and how that's being masked by taking groups that don't necessarily have those costs in their families and parading them around, as we see in this article. Part of what you see is not only were these people admitted, but they're paraded around to represent not just a more diverse Harvard, but an accomplishment by an America that hasn't happened, that we've overcome our past and our history, we're doing better now. When in fact, when you break out the data, we're doing far worse. When you look at incarceration, when you look at unemployment, when you look at everything, we're doing far worse. And the descendants of American slavery are actually bearing the brunt of that because they have not been repaired at all. What I want to read to you is a small section from the New York Times. It was in an article mid-2000s that came out that kind of lays out a data set that we can apply to this 14% to get a more realistic assessment of what this 14% actually truly represents if we were to apply the same data. So this is from the New York Times. So while about 8% or about 530, this is back in 04, 05, of Harvard's undergraduates were black, Lani Guinier, a Harvard law professor, and Henry Louis Gates, the chairman of Harvard's African and African American Studies Department, pointed out that the majority of them, perhaps as many as 2/3, were West Indian and African immigrants or their children, or to a lesser extent, children of biracial couples. So think about what we're saying here. We're saying if we applied that same 2/3 to this 14%, which wouldn't be unfair, what you end up with is nearly 9% of the 14 is either people that are from the Caribbean, from Africa, in 1 or 2 generations back, and also have one white parent. Now, there's no greater lens than that for me other than both Obama and Kamala. President Obama, Senator Kamala. On one hand, you have President Obama, who is half white and half East African, Kenyan. As you know, almost all of African Americans that descend from slavery came from West Africa. That's like a world apart, President Obama, but yet he was paraded around as the first African American president and a representation of the progress Americans made. On the other hand, you have Senator Kamala, who is half Indian and half Jamaican, does not descend from American slavery at all, and again was raised Indian based on her statements from her auntie, which I'll pull up right now, that say that her mother basically grounded her, defined her as an Indian. And so my problem isn't just so much that these people exist in America. They should. The reality of them being presented as both black and African American, it basically undercuts the reason that the term African American was created initially was essentially for the lost progeny of slavery that didn't know what country they came from. Talking about over 50 countries, one of the largest continents in the world, and essentially it doesn't really represent when you see the globe, Africa's much bigger than that. They had to do that, shrink it down to fit on the globe, and I think that what's happened is that a term was kind of created that wasn't defined around slavery, but it was defined around the continent of Africa, but it was meant to surround slavery. And so now you have people coming here trafficking on that term when they don't have a connection to American slavery. And I think it's created a situation where even the little programs that were created, we never had reparations, but affirmative action was clearly created by Lyndon Johnson to address or begin to address the major setbacks that slavery and Jim Crow costed millions of African American families. And you see groups coming in that don't have that cost in their family structure bearing the brunt of the benefits of that program. Obama being no greater example. I mean, when you look at Obama, I can't help but use my own family, my own father as a great example. They're about the same age, yet my father came from Alabama. His family came from Alabama. And all kind of interesting dynamics of what comes from slavery in our background. Whereas when you look over at Obama, you have a picture-perfect kind of story, and not to mention grounded in whiteness, inherited $500,000 from his white grandmother, receiving all the benefits of white American privilege, but he represents this progress for black America. That's a problem. Not that he happened, but that he was presented as a progress for a group that never received reparations when he's grounded both in being white American and also being East African. That's not correcting slavery at all. And so for me, and to me, that's a disrespect to the reason that the program of affirmative action was created in the first place. And I think for a lot of us, what's happening is that African Americans are being shut out, particularly African American males. Because what I believe is if we, and one of my solutions that I'm going to have is we just need the data. I want to see the data from the prisons, and I want to see the data from Harvard. Because I believe once you get the data, what you'll see is we're overrepresented in prison, meaning descendant of slave, particularly African American males, and we're underrepresented in colleges. And it's not just coming from ability; it's coming from the fact that America's masking it all. And so, like, coming back to the main theme of this, I want to pull up an article so you can see. Jesse Jackson coined this term for African Americans, initially a term for the progeny of slavery, because the continent is just so large and we didn't know which country we come from. When you read about anyone that, like one David Owalu, the actor that played Martin Luther King, he considers himself Nigerian American. When you read about Issa Rae, creator of the show Insecure, she's Senegalese American. When you read about all of these people, when you read about Kamala Harris, she's half Jamaican American. And so, like, what ends up happening is because we don't define African American around the true meaning, which was slavery, what ends up happening is that we shut out a whole group that needs to be recognized, and also is owed almost like a big chunk of the country's wealth. And I feel like what's starting to happen is, like, without understanding what Lyndon Johnson was saying, you have to go to Howard in the 60s, and you have to be there at that moment to understand how a hobbled group was supposed to be corrected and fixed through and by affirmative action along with additional programs. I want to cut in a piece of Lyndon Johnson. Presidents don't make statements at specific places on accident. So I'm going to cut this section in, let you listen to it, and then we'll come back.
But freedom is not enough. You do not wipe away the scars of centuries by saying now, you are free to go where you want and do as you desire and choose the leaders you please. You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bringing up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. Thus, it is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. All our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates. And this is the next and the more profound stage of the battle.
So coming back, you see Lyndon Johnson saying this program is to correct a group that's hobbled. This affirmative action. See, what happened is we moved it to diversity, and then inside of diversity, the major beneficiaries were white women, new immigrant Africans, Caribbeans, because what started to happen is that this slot that was kind of created to kind of correct things, and I would say lowered, it was allowed to be filled with people who had advantage and privilege that didn't deserve for it to be lowered. So if you're a white woman raised in a household with, and I'm bringing them in as well, if you're a white woman raised in a household with two parents just like your brother, I mean, you had no slavery in your background, no Jim Crow. You have the advantage of inheritance. Like, if you're a new African from a country, or say your parents immigrated here less than a generation ago with professional degrees, not too much money. When you come here without slavery. You miss Jim Crow. So this whole idea that the greatest cost of being African American is not getting a taxi or looking African American, it's a misnomer. It's a lie. The greatest cost of being African American is having slavery in your background and not getting no inheritance and coming from poverty and having a bunch of people that are just like you that are impoverished. And then in addition, not having language or a home country to ground you. That's not the cost that a person from the Caribbean bears. That's not the cost that somebody from Africa bears. Now, if you add in this other dynamic of people who have one white parent, say like Obama, what the problem with including them in the data for black Americans is that the white parent masks the cost of slavery. What do I mean? So if you have one white parent that is going to inherit money, and then you have a person that's from slavery on the other side, whether it's the father or the mother, your advantage still comes from being white. And so, like, for what ends up happening is, like, we don't get any data. What is the cost if you have two black parents that come from slavery, let alone four grandparents, which I don't think is too far to go back. We see this with Native Americans. They do it now. It's only fair. We should at least get the data. We should get the data on people who have four grandparents that come from African American slavery. I believe the data will show that they're basically locked out of schools. They're filling up prisons. I believe that data will show that that group is unemployed. I believe a large part of the reason that that group is being blanketed is because you have people that look like them that don't have their costs, not allowing their problems to come to the forefront. What do I mean? I mean, if people who have four grandparents are not getting into school because of the cost of slavery, and you have a group that doesn't have slavery in their background that looks just like them being paraded around, when does that group know that, meaning the group that came from slavery, know that they have a major problem and it's not their fault? They don't. I'm here to create the division. I'm here to point out natural differences and also to make a claim. My family, both sides, comes from a long legacy of slavery. You know, I come from West Africa. I understand that, but that's many generations ago in many, many countries. I am truly African American. And like what's starting to happen is that, you know, my claim is being diluted and people like me are being locked out of places like Harvard. So when is our voice heard? And I feel like one of the solutions that I say that we can do is I just want the data. Show me what, like Harvard and both Harvard and every penitentiary in this country should be forced to give us the data. How many of your African Americans have four grandparents that come from slavery? It's not hard to get. I'm not talking about going back multiple generations. I want to see the data, and I think we all deserve to see the data, because I believe that once we see the data, we'll understand that the depth of the problem will demand much more, as we deserve. I think that you can't ask for reparations and to be repaired until you know what's wrong. What stage of cancer do I have? Right now, we don't know what's wrong because we believe we had a black president. We believe we have a black senator, first black female senator. We believe in so many things that just aren't true as far as like whether these people really truly come from American slavery. And so like we believe we have 14% admission into Harvard, and we don't. Again, go to tonetalks.org, subscribe and donate. Again, I'm not trying to be divisive. I'm trying to be inclusive, but I'm also trying to make a claim on what my family and what other people's families are owed here in America. I want to see the data on how descendants of American slavery are doing, because I don't believe we're doing too well, and I believe that America knows that. Tone Talks out.